Before the flood. Before Noah built the ark. Before the world was washed clean. Something happened that changed humanity forever. The book of Genesis tells the story in just 4 short verses. 4 verses. Yet an ancient Jewish book, preserved for centuries in Ethiopia and copied among the Dead Sea Scrolls, expands those same events into an astonishing account spanning multiple chapters. According to the Book of Enoch, the world before the flood wasn't simply becoming more violent. It was being transformed. Not only by human choices, but by forbidden knowledge. Knowledge that, according to the text, was never meant to be given to mankind. Weapons. Metalworking. Sorcery. Astrology. The reading of signs in the heavens. Secrets that, Enoch claims, accelerated humanity's corruption and ultimately led to God's judgment. But here's the question. Did the Book of Enoch really preserve a forgotten chapter of biblical history? Or is this simply an ancient interpretation of Genesis that grew over time? Today, we're going to separate the text from the myths. We'll compare what Genesis says, what Enoch adds, what the Dead Sea Scrolls confirm, and what modern scholarship actually concludes. Because the real story is far more fascinating than the internet theories. If you enjoy well-researched biblical documentaries that separate historical evidence from speculation, subscribe to the 9th Tablet and join us as we uncover the ancient world, one mystery at a time. Now, let's begin where the mystery itself begins. With just 4 verses in the book of Genesis. For most people, the story begins, and ends, with 4 verses. Genesis chapter 6. They are among the most mysterious verses in the entire Bible. In just a few sentences, Genesis introduces the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the Nephilim. Then, almost as quickly as they appear, the story moves on. No explanation. No details. No names. No reason why these events mattered so much. Immediately afterward, Genesis tells us that humanity had become corrupt, violence filled the earth, and God determined that judgment would come through the flood. For centuries, readers have asked the same questions. Who were the sons of God? Who were the Nephilim? What caused the earth to become so corrupt? And why does Genesis spend so little time on an event that appears to change the course of human history? These questions were not ignored by ancient Jewish writers. Long before the time of Jesus, they attempted to answer them. One of the most influential answers appears in the Book of Enoch. Rather than replacing Genesis, Enoch expands upon it. It takes Genesis' brief account and develops it into a much larger narrative, one that seeks to explain why the world descended into such profound wickedness before Noah's flood. According to Enoch, the corruption of humanity did not begin with human beings alone. It began when heavenly beings crossed a boundary they were never meant to cross. The Book of Enoch names a place. Mount Hermon. A real mountain that still stands today along the border region of modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. According to the text, this mountain became the setting for one of the most dramatic moments in ancient Jewish tradition. Not because of a battle, but because of a decision. A decision that, according to Enoch, would alter humanity forever. The Book of Enoch introduces a group of heavenly beings known as the Watchers. The name itself comes from their role. They were watchers. Observers. Heavenly beings appointed to watch over creation. But according to Enoch, some of them chose another path. Chapter 6 describes 200 watchers descending to Mount Hermon under the leadership of a figure named Semjaza. The mountain was not chosen by accident. Enoch says it was there that these beings made an oath. Not simply to descend, but to bind themselves together in a decision they knew would have enormous consequences. The text says they feared that one of them might lose courage and refuse to carry out the plan. So they swore together. If one acted, they all would. This moment becomes the turning point in Enoch's story. Not because heaven declared war on earth, but because the boundary between heaven and earth had been crossed. The Book of Enoch tells us these watchers took human wives. This idea expands on Genesis chapter 6, where the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. Genesis leaves the story there. Enoch continues it. The unions produced offspring the text calls giants. These giants are described as growing in strength and size until they consumed the resources of the earth. When food became scarce, violence followed. The text claims they turned against animals, against humanity, and eventually, against one another. Whether one understands this account literally, symbolically, or somewhere in between, its message is unmistakable. The world before the flood was descending into chaos. Yet, according to Enoch, the giants were only part of the problem. The greater danger wasn't their size. It was what the watchers brought with them. Knowledge. Knowledge humanity was never meant to possess. And that, according to the Book of Enoch, was the true beginning of mankind's corruption. If you're enjoying this documentary, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people discover carefully researched biblical history and supports the work that goes into creating these documentaries. Because what the watchers taught next may be the most controversial part of the entire book. If the descent of the watchers marked the beginning of humanity's corruption, what came next, according to Enoch, accelerated it. Chapter 8 contains one of the most remarkable passages in the entire book. Rather than speaking in vague symbols, Enoch lists specific knowledge that certain watchers introduced to mankind. The first name mentioned is Azazel. According to the text, Azazel taught humanity how to forge weapons of war. Swords, knives, shields, armor. He also revealed techniques for working precious metals, making jewelry, and crafting ornaments. To a modern reader, these skills may seem ordinary. But in Enoch's worldview, they represented knowledge acquired outside of God's appointed order. Knowledge that, instead of bringing peace, would be used for violence. Azazel was not alone. Other watchers were said to teach humanity different forms of forbidden knowledge. The text speaks of sorcery, enchantments, astrology, the observation of celestial signs, and various forms of divination. To the ancient Jewish audience, these weren't harmless discoveries. They represented humanity seeking power apart from God. The issue wasn't knowledge itself. It was knowledge received through rebellion. This is an important point. The Book of Enoch does not describe advanced machines, lost civilizations, or futuristic technology. Those ideas are common on the internet. They are not found in the text. Instead, Enoch presents something much more grounded. Knowledge that transformed society. And, according to the author, accelerated human corruption. Weapons increased violence. Occult practices distorted worship. Pride replaced obedience. Little by little, humanity drifted further from its creator. This perspective helps explain why Enoch places so much emphasis on the watchers. In Genesis Human wickedness simply exists. In Enoch, there is a cause. The corruption of mankind becomes a story of influence, of choices, and of consequences. Whether one accepts Enoch's explanation or not, its influence on ancient Jewish thought is undeniable. Fragments of this very section were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Proof that these ideas circulated centuries before the time of Jesus. That doesn't settle every theological question. But it does tell us one thing. These beliefs were real. They shaped how many ancient Jews understood the world before the flood. If you're finding this documentary valuable, subscribe to the 9th Tablet. Every week, we examine ancient texts, biblical history, and archaeological discoveries with careful research, not sensationalism. Because the next question is even more important. If the Watchers brought forbidden knowledge, how exactly did it change humanity? The Book of Enoch presents a simple but profound idea. Knowledge is never neutral. It can be used to build or to destroy. According to Enoch, the knowledge brought by the Watchers did not merely improve civilization. It accelerated its corruption. The earth became increasingly violent. Weapons multiplied. Greed expanded. Power became the highest pursuit. Genesis summarizes this tragic transformation with remarkable simplicity. It says, "The earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence." Just one sentence. Enoch spends several chapters explaining how that happened. The giants themselves are described as becoming uncontrollable. At first, they consumed the earth's food supply. When that was no longer enough, the text says they turned against animals, then against humanity. Eventually, even against one another. Whether understood literally or symbolically, the message is clear. Violence feeds on violence. Corruption spreads until it consumes everything around it. The Book of Enoch portrays evil as something that grows. It rarely begins with catastrophe. It begins with small acts of rebellion, until an entire civilization is transformed. This is also where many modern interpretations go too far. Some claim Enoch describes advanced technology, alien civilizations, or impossible scientific knowledge. The ancient text says none of those things. Instead, it speaks about moral corruption, the abuse of knowledge, and humanity chooses power over obedience. That distinction matters, because it allows us to appreciate the text for what it actually says, rather than what we wish it had said. For the Jewish communities that preserved this book, the Watcher's story wasn't primarily about giants. It was about responsibility. It warned that when divine boundaries are ignored, the consequences reach far beyond those who first crossed them. Humanity inherited the results. And according to Enoch, those results became so severe that only one family would survive what came next. If you've made it this far, comment below. Do you think the Book of Enoch is best understood as history, symbolic theology, or something in between? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Genesis tells us that God looked upon the earth and saw that it was filled with violence. The decision to send the flood follows almost immediately. The Book of Enoch slows that moment down. Instead of simply announcing judgment, it explains why judgment had become unavoidable. According to Enoch, the corruption of humanity had spread across every level of society. Violence had become normal. Justice had disappeared. The knowledge given by the Watchers had been used not to build God's creation, but to corrupt it. Then the narrative shifts from earth to heaven. Enoch describes the archangels looking upon the suffering of mankind. They witnessed the violence, the bloodshed, the destruction spread across the earth. The cries of humanity rise before God. In response, God issues a series of commands. Raphael is instructed to bind Azazel. Gabriel is sent against the giants. Michael is commanded to bind the rebellious Watchers until the final judgment. And Noah is chosen to preserve life through the coming flood. This is one of the greatest differences between Genesis and Enoch. Genesis focuses almost entirely on humanity. Enoch reveals what it believes was happening behind the scenes. A heavenly courtroom. A divine judgment. A response not only to human wickedness, but also to angelic rebellion. Whether one accepts this interpretation or not, it demonstrates how many Jews during the Second Temple period understood the flood. For them, it wasn't simply a natural disaster. It was a cosmic judgment. The Book of Enoch also emphasizes God's mercy. Before judgment comes, a warning is given. Noah is told what is coming. A remnant will survive. This pattern appears throughout Scripture. Judgment, followed by mercy. Justice, tempered by grace. The flood, in Enoch's telling, was never merely about destruction. It was about preserving what remained good, so that humanity could begin again. If you're enjoying this journey through one of history's most influential ancient texts, consider subscribing. It helps support more documentaries like this and lets you know when the next episode is released. But one mystery still remains. What became of the Watchers after the flood? According to Enoch, their story didn't end there. One of the most enduring questions in the Book of Enoch is this: what happened to the Watchers after their rebellion? Enoch's answer is clear. They were not destroyed. They were imprisoned. According to the text, God commanded the archangels to bind the rebellious Watchers until the day of final judgment. This punishment was meant to prevent them from continuing to corrupt humanity. For ancient readers, this wasn't simply a story about punishment. It was a declaration that no rebellion, whether human or heavenly, would escape divine justice. This theme appears beyond the Book of Enoch. The New Testament contains passages that many scholars believe reflect the same tradition. In the letter of Jude, the author speaks of angels who abandoned their proper dwelling and were kept in chains until judgment. 2 Peter also refers to rebellious angels being held for judgment after the events surrounding the flood. These passages do not quote the entire story, but they demonstrate that the tradition surrounding the Watchers was widely known among early Jewish and Christian communities. It's important to be careful here. Some passages, such as 1 Peter's reference to the spirits in prison, are debated by scholars. Some connect them to the Watchers. Others do not. The evidence is not conclusive, and it's important not to present speculation as certainty. One remarkable fact remains. Although the Book of Enoch eventually disappeared from most biblical canons, it never disappeared completely. Fragments of the book were preserved among the Dead Sea Scrolls and in Ethiopia. The entire book continued to be copied, read, and treasured for centuries. This means the story of the Watchers was never truly lost. Its survival reminds us that ancient history is often more complex than we imagine. Some texts fade from one tradition, while remaining alive in another. The Book of Enoch survived because generations believed it was worth preserving. Whether one accepts it as scripture, valuable history, or ancient literature, its influence on Jewish thought is undeniable. And its questions continue to challenge readers even today. If this documentary has helped you understand the Book of Enoch in a new way, let us know by leaving a comment. Your engagement helps these documentaries reach more people interested in biblical history. But before we finish, there's one final question we need to answer. If this book was so influential, why does Genesis say so little? After reading the Book of Enoch, one question naturally arises. If this story was so important, why does Genesis mention it so briefly? The answer begins with understanding that these books were written for different purposes. Genesis is not trying to answer every question. Its focus is the covenant between God and humanity. It tells the larger story of creation, the fall, the flood, and the beginning of Israel's history. The Book of Enoch, however, has a different goal. It zooms in on one mysterious moment, attempting to explain how evil spread so dramatically before the flood. Rather than replacing Genesis, it builds upon one of its shortest passages. This difference is important. Genesis gives us the foundation. Enoch provides an interpretation. That distinction is recognized by many biblical scholars today. The Book of Enoch is best understood as part of the rich world of Second Temple Jewish literature. A world where writers reflected deeply on Scripture, asked difficult questions, and explored themes that Genesis introduced only briefly. This doesn't mean every detail in Enoch should be treated as historical fact. Nor does it mean the book should simply be dismissed. Instead, it offers us a window into how many ancient Jewish communities understood these mysterious verses. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls changed the conversation. Before their discovery, some assumed Enoch was a late Christian invention. But the scrolls revealed something remarkable. Fragments of the Book of Enoch existed centuries before Jesus. This confirmed that the book was already circulating among Jewish communities during the Second Temple period. It wasn't a medieval legend. It wasn't a modern fabrication. It was part of the religious landscape into which both Judaism and early Christianity emerged. Even so, the Book of Enoch was not included in most biblical canons. Different Jewish and Christian communities reached different conclusions about which books belonged in Scripture. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church continued to preserve Enoch as canonical. Most other traditions did not. That difference doesn't erase its historical importance. It simply reminds us that influence and canon are not always the same thing. Before we conclude, tell us in the comments. Had you heard of the Book of Enoch before watching this documentary? We'd love to hear your experience. So what should we make of the Book of Enoch today? After centuries of debate, the answer is probably more nuanced than either its strongest defenders or its strongest critics would like. The Book of Enoch is unquestionably ancient. Fragments found among the Dead Sea Scrolls prove that parts of it circulated centuries before the time of Jesus. It influenced Jewish thought. It influenced early Christian writers. And it preserves one of the most detailed ancient interpretations of Genesis chapter 6 that has ever survived. At the same time, its ancient origin does not automatically settle the question of biblical authority. Different faith traditions have reached different conclusions about that issue for nearly 2,000 years. What we can say with confidence is that Enoch is not a modern conspiracy theory. It is a real Second Temple Jewish text that asks profound questions about evil, corruption, judgment, and the destiny of humanity. And perhaps the greatest surprise is this. The Book of Enoch was never truly hidden. It was preserved openly in Ethiopia for centuries. What changed was not the book itself, but the awareness of it in the modern world. The Internet often presents Enoch as a forbidden text revealing secrets about aliens, Antarctica, lost civilizations, or advanced technology. But when we read the text carefully, a different picture emerges. Its real focus is moral and spiritual. It asks why humanity became corrupt before the flood. It warns about the abuse of knowledge. And it insists that both human and heavenly rebellion have consequences. Those themes remain relevant regardless of how one views the book's authority. In the end, the Book of Enoch may not reveal a lost secret about hidden civilizations. But it does reveal something important about the ancient world. It shows us how early Jewish thinkers wrestled with the problem of evil. How they understood the mysterious verses of Genesis 6. And how they imagined the cosmic struggle between obedience and rebellion. Whether one accepts Enoch as scripture, as valuable historical literature, or simply as an influential ancient interpretation, studying it helps us understand the world in which both Judaism and Christianity developed. And sometimes, understanding the questions ancient people asked can teach us as much as the answers they offered. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to the Ninth Tablet for more carefully researched explorations of biblical history, ancient texts, and historical mysteries. And let us know in the comments. Should we continue the Enoch Files series with a documentary focused entirely on the Watchers and the forbidden knowledge they brought to humanity? Thank you for reading. And remember, the most fascinating mysteries are often not the ones hidden from history, but the ones that have been preserved in plain sight all along.